Welcome to Making Links Radio, radio with a social conscience, and I'm Don Cossack. We're on the ground in Mozambique. Mozambique is hovering between war and peace. We are interviewing Joe Hanlon, noted writer and observer of conditions in Southern Africa, talking about the present conjuncture in Mozambique. Thank you for tuning in. This is Don Cossack, Making Links Radio, and we're in Maputo, Mozambique. We're on site here for Community Radio in Canada, and we're talking to Joe Hanlon. Joe Hanlon has written many books as a noted author on Southern Africa and Mozambique, and he's a political analyst. Joe, there's a lot going on right now in Mozambique with kind of the Renamo kind of resurging again. How do you analyze what's happening?
Okay, there isn't a simple analysis, but what we are seeing is that Mozambique is becoming potentially a relatively wealthy country, with huge gas resources, significant coal resources. There isn't so much of this money available yet, but by the end of the decade there's going to be a lot of money coming in from this. But it's also, Mozambique has seen real levels of growth among the elite and substantial increase in differentiation. The poorest half of the population is probably no better off than they were at the end of the war 20 years ago. Sitting here in Maputo with high-rise buildings going up all around us and traffic jams of expensive cars, you see a very different world. Now, much more broadly than that, what you're seeing then is people saying, wait a minute, what about us? And so we had a doctor's strike recently in which the doctors were basically saying, if there's going to be a gap between the rich and the poor, we want to be on the rich side, not on the poor side. I think what you're seeing then is a sense among a lot of people who are feeling that they are not benefiting from the increased wealth in the country, who are haven't gained. Now, when the peace accord between Renamo and Frelimo was agreed 20 years ago, Mozambique was a poor country, and we all said that the reason it wasn't Angola was because there were no natural resources here. And we were wrong. There are natural resources here, and they found huge amounts of stuff which nobody knew was here. Okay. What you have then is Renamo in particular saying, wait a minute, this isn't the peace deal we did because we didn't see any of this coming. We deserve a share. So I think that's at the core of that sort of problem. There's a set of other problems. One is that the leader of the Renamo guerrilla movement, Afonso Dhlakama, after the peace accord did not succeed in converting Renamo into an opposition political party. He was leader of the opposition but didn't create a party. And whereas Frelimo remains a very well organized party in the sense that we would recognize in Canada as a political party, structures at the base, kind of organization, all the kinds of things that you do to get people out to vote on polling day. Now, what that means is that Renamo has gotten fewer and fewer votes. Dhlakama has become less and less of a political figure. One of his biggest problems is that he has expelled from the party anyone that he sees as a threat, as a personal threat to his personal power. That means that basically he's thrown out of the party all the good organizers. The result of that is that there is a new opposition party, the movement, the Mozambican Democratic Movement, which has all the good political organizers and has now become the effective opposition. So where does that lead us? After the 2009 elections, Dhlakama retreated from the capital Maputo to a northern city, Nampula, became almost invisible. there was a confrontation. He said he was going to have demonstrations, which never occurred. He called various of the ex-guerrillas to come to his house in Nampula, and so there were a couple hundred people camped out in his house for weeks. There was then a confrontation with the police, but no demonstrations. Finally, we think his ex-military people said enough is enough, you're not doing anything. And they probably forced him to move to an old military base in the bush near the Gorongosa Mountain in the center of the country a year ago, and tried to put pressure on him to do something. What he had said 20 years ago to the military was, don't go into the new integrated army. When I'm elected president, you will become generals of the army, you will become minister of defense. And these guys are now saying, well, 20 years later, we've got nothing. If we had gone into the army, we would be rich now, and through all the corruption things and so on and so on. And so what's in it for us? So the outcome of this was a couple of attacks by the Renamo military on police posts, on an arms depot, on the main north-south road. The center of the country is very dense forest. It's very good guerrilla country. It's not very many occupants, so it's possible to go shooting at the road. Guebuza, President Armando Guebuza said, okay, we'll talk. But he's not been serious about talking. But at the same time, Jacama is also a terrible negotiator. I mean, both of them are terrible negotiators. My own experience from trade union negotiations is, all right, you go in with your demands and what you want, but you also have some sense of what you're going to negotiate a settlement for. Jacama never accepts anything less than everything. And his bargaining position is always everything or nothing. And so he keeps getting nothing. And he ends up in this position now because he won't accept a negotiated position. Okay. Guebuza, in turn, is not prepared to make any concessions to Jacama. So you have two very macho people knocking heads together, and we're not getting anywhere. And that's where we are now. And so Renamo escalated the military interventions, more attacks on the road, more attacks on police posts. I mean, we're still dealing in relatively small numbers. If you live in Johannesburg, it's rather more dangerous than living in the areas that are under attack in Mozambique. So, I mean, we're still dealing with relatively small numbers of casualties. Nonetheless, it really does scare people, and that's real. So we move to a position where finally the government felt forced to attack Guebuza's headquarters and forced to attack the main military base. I mean, one of the odd things with all of this is Renamo has been allowed to keep military bases for 20 years. So the government has allowed Renamo to be an armed party 20 years after the peace accord. Now everybody I talk to from the outside who looks at this says, how the hell did this happen? How was Renamo allowed to be an armed party? Okay. So we had two major raids, one on Jacama's base at Satangira and one on the military base in Maringwe. And so Jacama is now hiding out somewhere in the bush. But the question is, what happens now? And so there have been a series of more attacks on the road. But it's not at all clear how anyone moves forward from this. Guebuza keeps saying he's ready to negotiate, but isn't. Jacama's in the bush saying, well, he can't negotiate until his safety is secure. So what happens now? And the one thing that Jacama is asking for, which makes total sense, is he wants facilitators brought into this. And the one person that he's suggesting is Lorenzo Dosario, who is rector of one of the universities here, who was actually nominated as a go-between by Gabuza, who has gained the confidence of Jacama. Jacama says we would like to give him a higher status as a kind of formal facilitator in this discussion, and Gabuza says no. Now, I think two pig-headed macho people are not going to negotiate a solution without some kind of facilitation. We know that from trade union negotiations too. I mean, and the thing is, we also know it from the original negotiations, because if you go back to the Rome peace talks 20 years ago, it was Jacama and Gabuza, but it was also Raul Domingues on the Renamo side, who was more of a negotiator, and Chissano, who was president of Mozambique, who was a diplomat, and it was mediated by Sant'Egidio, an Italian religious group. So you had both hard men and soft men, and you had a mediator, and that's kind of what the process needs now. And the hard men just aren't willing to expand it out for discussions. And I think what's interesting is the President Gabuza does these open presidency meetings, and he was near where all the fighting was. He was doing public meetings, and the response from the public meetings is very interesting. First of all, it is saying we want peace. Secondly, it is saying that you guys should talk. But there's a third thing that is being said, is that Armando Gabuza, as father of the country, like any father, has the responsibility to resolve the family argument. And so, although Renamo is being blamed for the military action, Gabuza is being treated as a father who can't resolve problems within the family. And so I think he's now beginning to lose face, beginning to lose position, and I think he may have lost some of his political touch.
This demonstration this last weekend, there was some say up to 30,000 people. Where does that fit into the scheme of things right now?
I mean, I think the real numbers are more like 5,000 or 10,000. But the point was that it was, in Maputo, it was a demonstration of people saying we want peace, but it was also a demonstration against a set of kidnappings. Kidnappings are a whole separate saga, of which there have been 20 or 30, I think, in the past year. Largely within the Asian business community, largely either Asian business people or their wives or their children being kidnapped. But more important is that the police are involved. So the first trial, 3 policemen were convicted. There was a quite serious incident in Beira a couple of weeks ago in which a child was kidnapped, 13-year-old child. The family organized the money, then told the police they were going to pay this money. Within minutes, the kidnappers phoned saying, "You've talked to the police, we're going to kill the child," and they did. So the corruption within the police is a real issue, and again, the government takes the blame for that. What was interesting about the peace demonstration was that one of the themes of the peace demonstration was peace and against the kidnappings, and it was saying we are all Mozambicans. So various attempts to divide off the Asian origin community were basically being responded to by people saying, no, we're all Mozambicans.
Just getting back to something you said earlier about the resources and wealth of Mozambique. Rio Tinto's in Mozambique, Valley, mining in Tet. Where does that play in all of this?
Well, at the moment, this is all very new, very recent. There is not that much money coming into the country from the mining per se. some money is coming in from capital gains tax as shares in the mining companies get sold and pieces of the gas companies get sold. But there's no resource revenues yet per se. What is happening is that elite-linked businesses are getting contracts with the mining and the gas companies, so that there's Frelimo-connected business people are getting contracts to do the work around the mining. But I mean, it will be the end of the decade before Mozambique sees any real money. Having said that, the price of coal is falling at the moment, so it's not at all clear whether how much is going to come out of these coal mines. The gas in the north is really significant. This is one of Africa's biggest gas fields. It's going to be huge. We're talking about investments in the range of 40 or 50 billion US dollars. I mean, huge amounts of money by Mozambican standards. And that the construction of that sort of thing is starting now. This is underway. The gas is identified. The pipes, the wells are being drilled. This is all already underway.
Now you can see the pipes going up the highway.
Yeah.
Trucks hauling them up all the time.
So, that is going to make a big difference, but not immediately. I mean, what is striking here is that here in Maputo in particular is the conspicuous wealth. High-rise buildings being built with flats being sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Where is this money coming from? People are not getting this from their salaries. And so there's a real sense that the elites are benefiting and people don't like it.
What does that mean in terms of where Frelimo's at right now and the rise of MDM? Do you see a political change happening over the next while? And the pressure of the wealth being taken out or the wealth being captured by a few?
Okay, it is important to distinguish between Maputo and the rest of the country in many different ways. If you look at survey data, Frelimo actually remains very popular. They have done a lot of things in rural areas. Some of the rural development funds have been important. All of the things about health services, schools, some Millennium Development Goals stuff, people really do appreciate it. Now, what we've found in interviews, I mean, something that people would say to us repeatedly is, my children can go to school, but my pockets are empty. And there's a real problem. The kids are now coming out of school and can't get jobs. So there is a potential discontent, particularly in urban areas. But in rural areas, I think Frelimo remains very popular, and Mozambique is still 70% rural. So, where do we go from here? Well, we have local municipal elections in 53 municipalities on the 20th of November. The question, Renamo is boycotting the elections, which from their standpoint may be sensible because they have no organization. So in almost every city, it's a two-way fight between Frelimo and the MDM. MDM currently controls two cities, Beira and Quelimane. So the first most important thing is they have to keep those two cities. My own judgment is if they can win, say, an extra 5 cities, which is possible, then they become a serious opposition party. You go into national elections in October of 2014. Whether or not Renamo stands in the national elections, if MDM does credibly in this year's elections, then they become the official opposition in the next election, and that clearly. Could they be elected president? Could they get a majority in parliament? No, not a chance. But it would change the political shape of the country to have a more active opposition party. And that would be very useful. I mean, part of the problem is that all the party leadership is old men, because MDM is headed by Davis Simango, who hates Frelimo because his parents were killed by Frelimo 40 years ago. And so you have a kind of leadership of old men. There isn't any real space for a younger generation yet. And that is leading to discontent. Now, one of the reasons why MDM won in Kellyman, this was in a by-election recently, was that they were able to mobilize young people. And the young voters actually tipped the balance. Now, if they can mobilize young people this time, it could make a difference. But the broader question is, what are they going to do for these young people? Are they going to create jobs? Are they going to create anything for them? Because so far, these people are getting educated, perhaps not very well, but are getting educated, and there's nothing for them.
You're working on a book called Cerveja, about Galenians in Cerveja, which deals a lot with production and agriculture. What's the background to that?
Okay, I mean, the book is called Chickens and Beer, in English, and what we're looking at, in fact, is small-scale commercial agriculture. We're looking at farmers who are not subsistence farmers, farmers who are medium farmers, who do most of their production to sell, but who are not the really grand farmers. And what you're seeing here in Mozambique is that everybody forgets this middle group. The donors, the NGOs, all want to support the small farmers. Now, the small farmers in Mozambique are opening the land only with a hoe, with a short-handled hoe. They use no new technology, very little irrigation, very few inputs, and most small farmers can't succeed in feeding their family. The alternative of that is saying, okay, we should give large tracts of land, tens of thousands of hectares, to big investors. Now, what we're saying is that what you should be doing is try to get the better farmers to expand their area, to move people up to 5 hectares to 20 hectares, and say, okay, how do you, because these are people who are existing Mozambican farmers, the better existing Mozambican farmers. We think there are actually significant numbers of these people in Mozambique, perhaps 50,000. Now, that's small compared to Zimbabwe, for instance. I mean, Zimbabwe has many more of these small commercial farmers. The land reform created 160,000 small commercial farmers. Mozambique's nowhere near that. Nonetheless, there are more of these small commercial farmers than most people realize. And it is largely bootstrapped, although there is a bit of support from aid agencies, from NGOs. Cooperative League of the USA is very important in this. Helping these, but what is important about this is it's support, not support for organizing, it's hands-on support of people that get their boots muddy. It's hiring tractors to farmers, it's going out there with extension officers, it's actually doing the concrete stuff, it's buying the soybeans. And what we're seeing is where there is support, you can get growth. And the other thing that we are seeing is a growth of contract farming. Contract farming, of course, has all sorts of problems, but the most important thing of contract farming is it guarantees a market. Now, your biggest problem for producers in Mozambique is they don't want to expand their area and don't want to invest because they don't know if they can sell the stuff. And we're in a bizarre position here in Mozambique where the market price for maize, farm gate price for maize here, is probably a third of the world market price. Now, at a third of the world market price, there is no point in being a commercial maize farmer. It's just you can't make money at it. If you had a marketing board here, if you had floor prices, some of these kinds of things, you could actually get more people producing maize. There would be more food security. but at a third the world market price. Who's going to produce maize? So people are producing cash crops, cash soybeans, not for export, but for the domestic market, particularly to feed chickens, and a whole string of export crops, beans, sesame seeds, cotton.
Just to get back to looking forward then, it sounds like there's this whole part on wealth extraction, as you were talking about with oil and so on. Then there's a need to rebuild inside of Mozambique. The agricultural level you're talking about, where there's an economic and social base that's working. And then what about the cities? What should be happening in the cities? With these young people.
Yeah. Okay. There's a whole string of problems with cities. People migrate to cities everywhere in the world, and we're not going to stop that. But what you're seeing, particularly in Mozambique, is anyone with any kind of education is migrating to the city because they think my parents are hoe farmers, that they're illiterate, that's a terrible life. And so they end up in market towns or, medium-sized cities or big cities as street traders, as people on the margins of things. And there are no jobs, there are no real jobs. Now, that comes of two sorts of things. One is that Mozambique has never prioritized job creation. And the other is that the international community has always complained that Mozambique has too large a public sector. The public sector is largely teachers and health workers, and Mozambique actually needs more teachers and health workers and extension officers and so on, but the international community says no. So you even have educated people coming out from the teachers' colleges who can't get jobs as teachers. So that's a problem. You have an educated group that can't get jobs. If you go back to looking at the rural areas, if you can create a decent life in rural areas, that would somewhat shift the balance. It would at least reduce the migration. One of the things we saw in Leoma, which is a soya area which has had huge growth in soya production, is you suddenly have young middle-sized farmers who from their soybean profits have motorcycles, they have mobile phones. And the thing about the motorcycle is that you can then go into town and go to the disco at the weekend. And you've got more money to spend in the disco in the weekend than some of these kids who are hanging around the town. And so this has become a different model of what can be done. But again, there's hardly any support for this. There's no support for job creation. And the line in Mozambique is the same as the line that we get in Britain and I suspect in Canada of young people who've got to create their own jobs. Well, they're not going to do it. I mean, my generation, there were jobs, and it is about the economy creating jobs, and it's about the state supporting the economy to create jobs, and there's no policy for that here.
Joe, how can people follow you? You've got a website?
Yeah, I have a website which is tinyurl.com/MOZAMB, Mozamb. And I also do a newsletter on Mozambique, and for that you just send me a note. It's j.hanlon, HANLON, at open.ac.uk. I'm a visiting fellow at the Open University.
Thank you very much. Muito obrigado, Joe.
De nada.